Hello and welcome to the second blog of Justice and Democracy in Sunderland. This particular blog is going to focus on the councillor aspect of this whole story and what's recently happened with the death of Paul Watson and then the transition through Harry Truman through to the vote a couple of weeks ago and the inauguration of Councillor Miller as the leader last Wednesday and 55 votes out of 75. Not unanimous, not all of the Labour group voted for him, some were missing, but certainly the opposition did vote against. Councillor Graeme Ferguson Miller, he's born in Scotland, we believe somewhere near Paisley, came down to Sunderland, we think around 1982-83, I think he's been down here about 35 years, became a councillor in Washington in the early to mid 2000s, sat in the same ward as Councillor Matt Knight, who's recently come back, so having previously fled Sunderland and come back to be Councillor of Horton on the same council as his mother Doris Matt Knight, who was our recent mayor and who as mayor did quite a good job over the year. Now the thing about Councillor Miller is he's a bit of a shapeshifter. He's a bit of a wheeler and dealer. He's a bit of a character in that he keeps his friends very close, but also he's prepared to sit there, say nothing, and then criticise privately sort of all of the things that go on. And I'll give you an example of that. The one thing about the cabinet system, a bit like the being in government in terms of a prime minister and those that sit around all the ministers, the cabinet system is exactly the same. The principle of governance is that what is decided behind closed doors in cabinet is what's called a collective decision. And that collective decision means that if you don't on record voice an opinion against something, then effectively you've backed your leader, you've backed the officers who've brought the reports, and you've said this is how we're going to govern collectively. So you can't come along later and say, I didn't agree with that. A good example of that, Tony Blair's war. If you didn't say no in cabinet actually on minutes, then history showed that you actually agreed with the war and what subsequently happened, and excuse me, and therefore were tainted by that. And the same thing happens in Sunderland. So over the 10 years of Paul Watson's cabinet, every cabinet paper will show who agreed with what, who disagreed, who voted for what vote went through unanimously, what went through on a majority vote, and sometimes what just didn't go through at all. Now, Councillor Miller has a habit of going with the leader, as he did with Paul Watson, because when Councillor Miller became councillor in Washington, I believe it was Washington East, where, is it Washington East or, yeah, I think it's Washington East, somewhere around that way. Or Washington South, sorry, it's his wife who's Washington East, which is what gets confusing. And his wife is Fiona Miller, by the way. And he sat around, he dabbled in sort of the local politics of Washington, was very vociferous and very clearly at the time in the 2000s, very anti-Claire Phillipson, Wayside Women in Need and anything to do with that, because apparently he was not friends with the likes of Eric Timmins, who I became good friends with a bit later in sort of my life before he died, Derek Slightholm, etc. Even John Kelly at that stage probably wasn't his natural ally. Now, Paul Watson brought him into the cabinet, as he brought John Kelly in, but if I'd be honest, I would look on that as an outsider and say, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer, if I'd be quite honest. And I think that's proven to a point. And the reason I say that is, I would actually say that Councillor Miller and Councillor Kelly, who I think is his henchman to be honest, and that's my view, just I go off the behaviours, go off sort of how people do things. Excuse me. And I would actually say that he's actually quite a treacherous character. He's not very straightforward, he's prone to lying and misleading people, as I think we'll find out with his voting record in cabinet, to now how he became leader. I think between Councillor Kelly and Councillor Miller, I think they've sort of cooked up some sort of scheme, and I think it happened just before Paul. I think it emerged just before Paul Watson sort of announced he was ill, and I think the tipping point was the energy cum incinerator, which is out behind the Nissan site, but which the Teal Farm residents seem to, who are Washington East, yet the incinerator site is actually on John Kelly's ward in Washington North. And the interesting thing about that is, across the A132, the main highway from Sunderland through to Washington Gateshead, the Teal Farm residents, of whom Councillor Miller's wife is one of the key councillors, seem up in arms about this incinerator. Now, they might be valid. I don't know, because I haven't looked into the exact detail, but I'm a bit perplexed on how this big incinerator can be the other side of a major road, quite a way away from houses, but people actually want to have a good sort of it. You've got to ask yourself who's agitating what here, because I don't believe the Teal Farm residents have actually been told all of the truth, but I think the truth will emerge over the coming weeks. Now, the reason this is critical is if you go back to when Brexit came, one of the biggest employers since the shipyards in the northeast is actually Nissan, and all of the associated industries, Van Tech, etc, 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 you know, the sort of thing that goes with it. They were worried about Brexit, but also Sunderland had got into partnership with South Tyneside over what's called the IAMP, the Independent Automotive Manufacturing Park, effectively where the old airfield was, running all the way down to Tesco's roundabout, those sort of fields. Now, just behind Nissan, the proposed incinerator cum energy waste plant. Now, the other thing to note about Nissan is, over the years, we've all seen the wind turbines go up, because Nissan's actually got into this whole idea of green energy, batteries, etc, etc. But also you can see the other shift in the city around the new bridge and the roadways, which are all going to lead down to the port. So if I was a betting man, I would actually say everything coming off that automotive park, and Nissan cars, batteries, you name it, whatever's manufactured there, will ultimately probably be shifted through our port. And you know what, that brings more jobs. More jobs for Sunderland, retains people in Sunderland. Yeah, we employ Tynesiders and things like that, but we'll forgive them for that. And I'm starting to feel a bit like Eamon Holmes of Graeme Miller, This Is Your Life, but I think people need to scrutinise you and have a look at your record, because I think your record actually is pretty poor. But going back to the Nissan thing, at Brexit, Nissan were worried. And all of a sudden, if you remember, Theresa May, who was had just become Prime Minister, suddenly announces a deal with Nissan. Now, I think the other two characters within that were possibly Councillor Ian Malcolm, who was the leader of South Tyneside, and excuse me, it's a really bad cough at the moment, and Councillor Paul Watson, or the late Councillor Paul Watson, who was our leader. But obviously for confidentiality reasons, everything was hushed hush, so they couldn't explain it to the public. Because sometimes to retain jobs, especially on the scale of Nissan and what it means to the region, the city, to Newcastle, to Gateshead, Sunderland and down, then they couldn't tell you the detail. But all of a sudden this incinerator, which will generate a lot of electricity and feed into the new, I think it'll feed into the new sort of IAMP and into Nissan to help with their production costs. Got loads of costs for them as well, if they don't have to take off-grid their own energy and then sell it back. But we're not told those sort of details, so you've got to sort of guess some of it and work it out yourself. All of a sudden, Graeme Miller and John Kelly are quite sort of anti this. You can see by, we've got photographs of John Kelly actually with his residents, blah blah blah, anti, yay, anti the thing. Come on John, you sat in cabinet, you've made a decision, you then can't go out into the field and say, I support that. You've got two of the councillors in your ward who should have done that and protected you. But you chose, as I think Graeme Miller has through proxy through his wife, which is the interesting one, to actually stir the residents up. And just before Paul announced he was poorly, whispers started to emerge that he were going to undermine Paul and use the incinerator against him to oust him as leader. Dangerous game with Nissan, dangerous game with the South Tyneside to that, because that would have cost jobs, that would have cost lies, Christmas presents on the table for the kids, you know, the sort of emotive stuff, but at the same time, reality. Sometimes, even as a socialist, you've got to bite the bullet and actually get these big companies in to work with you. The good thing is, Nissan pays well, trains people well, and skills them. Really apologise for this cough. In fact, just give us a second because I do need a drink. There you go, sorry. So, you're planning on undermining Paul Watson, or so I'm guessing, but I think I'm not, with what the subsequent events that have happened. But then Paul, I think, preempted things by announcing that he was finally ill. But cleverly carried on to his very last breath. And you know what, hats off for him, because I bet you couldn't have done that. Sat there at home knowing you were dying and actually making decisions for the city and still having the passion for the city, because you know what, the pair of yous are actually cowards. You really are. You're actually treacherous cowards who don't deserve to be councillors, never mind govern this city. Because I tell you what, the way you've behaved, and we'll come up to other things around children, about moving capital monies around, Mr. Kelly, that you got told off once from Paul that if you ever did it again you'd be under investigation, and you pulled the same trick. So you know what, the pair of yous really need scrutinising, and we're going to do it because we've got the evidence on you. So Paul said he was dying. Cabinet, or his loyal friends, whipped around him. You two said all the right platitudes, all the right things. Oh, we're behind Paul. Well, yes, hell. You two were plotting like thick as thieves. And that came out once Harry became deputy, after Paul's moved up from deputy to temporary leader or acting leader, and then went into a bit more permanent position on the full vote. And then we had the election. Unfortunately, Harry lost 2 or 3 key allies around the city, so he won the vote 32-29. But what most people don't know is you went behind everybody's back and you went cash for votes. Give your jobs for votes, because at 5 to 6 last Wednesday, when there was 7,000 people on my Twitter feed, I actually put up the full cabinet, the deputies and all your chairs of committee. Now yes, Mr. Modi didn't vote for you, but he's there on a mandate, and Mr. Porthouse is a bit of a weird one in that we already know that Barry Curran had turned you down, because I think his bottle went, if me facts are true and hearing that. And so you put Mr. Porthouse. 2 things about Mr. Porthouse. One, I'd had a 4-day spat with him and others where he called us Tory trolls, etc, and we're on the Sunderland Labour Facebook page, and it's still up there, so you can go and read it. If not, I'll at some point on my Twitter feed, when I wouldn't be bothered, I'll put up all of the links that we took down off there, so you kind of delete it. Not unless you burn all the computers in the city. And the other thing is, he's just announced tonight that Save West Park is not going to happen because you've suddenly taken it off all of the development plan. You've took about 3 or 4 sites, which are all key to yourselves, but you've left all of the controversial ones on the people who didn't vote for you. So would say the sort of games in the Treasury, you're not thinking about your city, you're thinking about yourselves and where yous want to be. And I tell you what, it stinks to high heaven. It's like being in a piggery. And boy Christ, do we need some sort of Vicks nasal spray to put under there just to be around you, because it absolutely honks. So therefore you can see the games, you can see what you're up to. You were already then making noises about sort of saying the incinerator will get the planning, we'll put a bit of pressure on the planners and put a bit of pressure on the committee. So we're hearing, because the good thing is, one of the guys, or one of the people who voted for you, who you give a cabinet job, shall I just say, they're an absolute dream. Because they're on my Twitter feed under a different name. I've worked out who they are, and the stuff that they're messaging to me about you and Mr. Kelly and one or two others about what you're up to and what you're planning. Let's just say, who do you trust? Because I tell you what, I trust this person, that they're a very, very clever person. And it's not who you think, it's not an obvious one. It's not one I've ever talked to. So that'll give you, that might narrow it down. I think you'll have Mr. Essel in the room tomorrow with his sort of special methods of putting a bit of pressure on people and saying, hey, who's talking to Gavin Elliott? Well, I'll tell you what, there's somebody in your cabinet talking to me, and by Christ, is their information valuable? So we'll think on that one, that if you breathe, we know about it. What you have for dinner, we know about it. Where you go, we know about it. Who you meet, we know about it. Because last Wednesday, before the full council, it was interesting that you met the leader of South Tyneside and agreed that the IAMP will go ahead, and therefore by default you've agreed that the incinerator's going to get ahead. I bet you haven't told the voters that. I bet your wife hasn't gone to Teal Farm and said, sorry lads, we've got to actually get it through because it's crucial to the city. Whether you like it or not, you're just a small group. And that's democracy. People can protest, I don't have a problem with that. But sometimes you've got to bite your tongue and go, I get the bigger picture. Especially when thousands of jobs are at risk. It was bad enough when half of Nissan voted UKIP, you know, and come out of Brexit. So I hear from the sort of lads I talk to. You know, chickens voting or turkeys voting for Christmas is the sort of phrase. But that is their choice. Democracy, their choice. Not being told what to do, not being bullied into what doing, but actually being free thinking to say, this is where I'm going to put my X. And I haven't got a problem with that, and I don't think the majority of the city, but in the people who are coming out of the woodwork to say there is something wrong with this city about how we operate, there is something wrong about how decisions are made, and they're coming out in their droves. I'm just going to check my little, I'm like Eamon Holmes, but only I've got a black book on you. Let's have a look. In terms of John Kelly, your misdemeanours, let's just touch on that in a moment. You, as portfolio holder for culture, you moved a capital budget into another capital budget, which is a big no-no without cabinet approval, because there are rules under SIPFA and how audit and accounting procedures happen within councils, and it's all written there in black and white, because believe me, I read them, I slept them, I did them under my job. And the only thing you can move are under subheadings around revenue budgets. Capital budgets, they are fixed. They are fixed at the beginning for a purpose, so people can't just go off and do what they want and then claim later, but we needed to do this instead. No, capital budgets, when they're agreed, are they're given for a purpose, set up for a purpose, and got to be spent on that purpose. If they get moved, which you've done twice, and the second time you're under investigation, now I don't know where that investigation went, but maybe Fiona Stanton, who's the director of Labour North, would like to look at just how that investigation concluded. Did it conclude satisfactorily, or is it still going, or has your pal just kiboshed it? I don't know, but the public want to know. This is transparency about governance. If you're going to be up there and you want the big cash and you're going to play the big boy, we want to look at what you're doing. And there's plenty more around you that are going to be under scrutiny sort of in the coming weeks. We're hearing things about the pontoon. Now, Denny Wilson is not a bad is not a bad councillor. But the problem is, I knew Denny when Denny was just a councillor, and good on him for what he's done with his campaign around the castle and getting that renovated. It is a historic building that needed to be done, because since Time Team went there, it needed a lot of work on it. But then Denny sold out to his votes to Councillor Miller, because as we hear on the grapevine, he's supposedly going to get a pontoon either side of the Hilton part of the River Weir and be able to put a boat between two pubs. Now, if Denny wants to come and deny that, that's fine. But I suspect when you've just paid 100 odd million quid for a bridge, the rest of, and we're all in austerity, I think the rest of the public are going, why do we need a boat between two pubs? Well, I think that might be the key, but I'm not saying there's anything dodgy about it, but it just smells of wrongness. Wrong money spent on the wrong project at the wrong time because it appears to be a pet project of a councillor. And it's by no mean choice that you've suddenly become chair of the Area Committee North, when people like Richie Bell have been around for years and done a really, really cracking job. So, you know, it just smacks of it. The other thing Councillor Miller did, which most of you don't know, is when Paul Watson for his 10 years was actually in power, one of the rules he put into the Labour group is thou shalt not have 2 jobs. So if you're a portfolio holder, you had to commit to 5 days. You had to do it full time. You couldn't be like Paul Stewart now as Cabinet Secretary and working in one job down South Tyneside for 2 or 3 days and then up here for the other 2. You had to do it full time, which is probably why you got the sorts of people who had the time on their hands. A little bit around Harry, Mel Spedding, my former mother-in-law, and not mother-in-law, auntie-in-law, Florence Anderson. People who had brought their kids up and politics was their life now. And that's why I don't have a problem with them getting paid. But where I did have a problem is where they were stacking up committee after committee. And Paul stopped that. He stopped it dead and just made sure that you only had so many jobs. Day one, Councillor Miller comes in and has abandoned that. So straight away he's going for the Fire Authority, which is well paid, and leader. The last person who tried that was Bryn Sidaway, and it was his downfall, because the Fire Authority, militant firemen, are a hard bunch to look after. And by Christ, at some point, if they smell a rat, a wrong un, and there's plenty of them still in Fulwell who work up at Marley Potts, and plenty of them are my mates, and by Christ will I be talking to them and saying, well, he's making decisions about his, but didn't trust him, because the bloke stinks. So you can see, Graeme, you're not going to go an easy ride. And it's all factual. It's all based on the truth. It's all based on the fact that you've wheeled and dealed. You actually haven't told the public that you're, if our information is right, that you're actually a member of Momentum. Now, Momentum's interesting. Don't have a problem with Momentum, that they exist and do whatever they want. It's a bit like UKIP. It's just they exist. A bit like the far right, far left, whatever. Time with anti-fascist alliance. These groups existed, it's democracy. But in 2015, when Corbyn got to power, Momentum got created. Now, at that point, it was about the youth disaffected vote and a guy called John Ashman or Ashford. He utilised that. And then 2017, when Corbyn strengthened his parliamentary and his Labour seat and his vote as leader, as part of the party, Momentum suddenly professionalised itself. One, it had a constitution, you had to be subscribed to be in it, blah blah blah. But also you also had to be a member of the Labour Party. What that did is it gathered up a lot of disaffected people, but some of these are, let's say, I'm a socialist, but their form of socialism isn't my form of socialism. And you can see the sort of ideologies that are coming through. Now, I don't go off ideology, I just go off values. Let's do the right thing. Let's do what's best for us and our city and the people of our city. And then let's then look at the national politics thereafter. Where the ideology is like, let's crash all big business and tape out the shareholders, bring it all down, comrade, and all the rest of it. Yeah, you can see sort of where I'm going with that one. But like Citizen Smith of, what do you call it, the Tooting People's Republic Army, or whatever it was in the 1970s. It just ain't going to happen in Sunderland. Sunderland's actually quite a... Sunderland and Newcastle are actually similar in... They're actually quite stable places for Labour. Yeah, we have the odd sort of left-wing person, but actually we're more centrist and caring in that way. But with it, and also understand the business role, where the Paul Callahans and the charities like the Foundation of Light fit in, where Tombola fit in. We welcome those sort of businesses into our city because they actually add a dimension and they create jobs alongside, because the public sector can't just create jobs, especially not in the current climate with the Tories' false austerity of now 8 years going into another 4, where they've actually added £1 trillion to the debt, so I understand, whilst actually telling us the rest of us got to tighten our belts, but they've got richer. So tell us how you pull that one, Paul Daniels, because it's one hell of a magic trick. And then you've got Graeme Miller saying, oh, we'll make sure the IAM doesn't go through, we'll bring that project down. And the interesting thing is, he's actually set this out in his email. Now, I'll put the email on my Twitter feed. I think it's also on Landlather's site somewhere. If not, I'll repost it in the next few days. And when you read it, he posted it just shortly after Paul's death, about 6 to 8 weeks to the group. He made a play for power quite early on. And you can see the tone of it. He's criticising what Paul was doing. Now, bear in mind, this was a man who, in collective cabinet, said, I'm one of you guys. I'm with the leader. I'm behind the leader. I'm 100% behind the leader. I'm a big bloke. I'm behind the leader. It's a bit like the dilemma of last summer of being both a Sunderland fan and a Celtic fan. One, who were you supporting, but who were you cheering for? And two, who were you condemning with all the violence and everything else that went on? I didn't hear you shouting very much, Graeme. The fact that you were silent. A bit like your days in cabinet. A bit like your days in adult services, where you passed a lot of what my former boss was getting up to. And your most heinous crime, and I'll talk direct to Claire Phillipson here, is, and Centrepoint, and Salvation Army and all of the other charities in the homeless sector. Between you and Alan Caddick, you actually crashed the homeless sector on the contracts on the basis that you didn't have the money. Yet, what you're actually doing was trying to bury all the evidence to do with the charity that got the 5 million quid with no accounts. How bloody ethical are you, mate, to do stuff like that? There was homeless kids. There was one charity about to hand 10 kids to children's services and say, put them into care if you crash us for the sake of 76 grand. Now, I intervened on that one with both adult and children's services, and both directors saw sense. For the sake of 76 grand a year, 38 grand each, they were actually going to save millions in terms of the care budget if that hadn't gone ahead. And then unfortunately you came up against Claire. Now, Claire's a wily opponent, by God is she. And me and Claire go back 20 odd years. I've known Claire since I was a student in the city in the early 90s, and known of her, and then came into direct contact from 1999 onwards. And then as a council officer, I think I had more complaints from Claire, and I never had one upheld, mind Claire, so that fair play to you. But the funniest thing you ever said in a meeting was with me and Katie in 2005-06. It was you and I think Anita, and you turned around to us and said, the thing I like about you, Gavin, is you just don't like conflict. Bring it on. If it's for the right reasons, I'll do it. So there you have it. That's the sort of environment Graeme Miller is prepared to actually kick homeless people on the street to bury the evidence, because he was there. But the other side is around disabled children. And most people don't know, Victoria Kalimba, if you remember the black girl who got battered, or the horrible case in London, wherever it was, and they made the decision, Parliament made the decision in 2004-05 to actually bring children's education and children's social care together. Now, our first director of that was a woman called Helen Patterson, who's the only director we've ever had who also had our image rights what do you call it? Patented. So she was getting paid for every time we took a photograph of her and published. I kid you not, and this, Jed Fitzgerald and Dave Smith knew this and they still employed her. So get your values right there. And this is where my story gets personal, because in 2007 my daughter and 3 other disabled kids in the school got battered by another disabled kid who wasn't the kid's fault, it was his mother who was the physio of the 4 kids. And the kid was from another authority, got placed into Sunderland with the permission of the head teacher. Even though I was a former governor and former councillor Norma Wright was on the same committee as me, it was agreed under the previous head to not take any more children. I've got the letters. And the woman we wrote to was the woman who came MP for Durham North West, Pat Glass, because she was head of education in SEN at the time. And the basis was the funding wasn't there in the early 2000s to take any more children and therefore any new children coming in were a risk. The physio and the head took this child battered staff, able-bodied kids, and on many occasions my daughter and 3 or 4 others. Ofsted came in, my wife taught Ofsted. Ofsted failed the particular school in 2007, November. In fact, she taught them on November the 5th. Was it Bonfire Night or Halloween? Halloween. And they got finished the sword after. But then education rallied round all of this. And that's where the story happened. And one of the fallouts from this was... oh, excuse me. I'm really sorry that this isn't as perfect as I'd like it. But then maybe that shows the human side of us. And I actually do care, because this does stress me out a bit. It's adult services under John Fisher. There's a current head of adult services there who was a general manager at the time, and his deputy general manager who's still there. And I won't name those two, but I'll name John Fisher because he's now left. But it's up to the local authority to deal with the other two, because they'll know who they are. One's a female, one's a male, and he's head of adult services. But about to retire next year on a package. Well, with what I'm about to reveal, maybe not. Maybe he needs looking at. There's a thing called the financial assistance policy, and that has to be signed off by the portfolio holders. People like, in the early days, it would have been Eric Timmins until Graeme Miller took over. When Graeme Miller took over, I was at my height of actually complaining about all the things about DFGs, and because it took them over 3 years to do my DFG for my child while we lived in horrendous housing conditions whilst owning a big house that we're currently in. Somewhere not far from where I'm filming tonight. So Graeme Miller meets these people, and as the portfolio, he has to sign this off. The fact that he doesn't know is the financial assistance policy is a document about that thick, and basically it takes that long from start to finish that disabled kids die. And I'm going to leave it there.